Hello, I'm Alison Milton. Today I'm going to talk to you about medieval textiles, wool and spinning. I'm going to start with a medieval saying, "I praise God and never shall, it is the sheep hath paid for all." And that's very true. The foundation of the wealth of this country, our beautiful, luscious, verdant isle, is because of sheep and their wool. You see, our land has a lot of land that's not suitable for arable production. We can't grow grain in a lot of places. What we can do is graze animals. And because it's upland, it's quite hilly, it's not really suitable for cows either. It's great for sheep though. Sheep do really well, and they do quite well on poor pasture. So we had a lot of sheep in the Middle Ages, and actually not very many people, because we had things like the Black Death and famines, which meant that there were relatively few people and a lot of space to grow sheep. So we had a lot of wool. Nobody knows quite what medieval sheep look like. Their illustrations tend to be a bit sketchy, the little fluffy blobs with legs. They're not the kind of detailed portrait that you want to say, that one is that breed and that one is that breed. We think there were two basic types. There were some small upland sheep that was grazed on poor pasture and which produced a short staple fleece. Something possibly a bit like this. I'll just put my spindle down. I don't know whether you can see. It's a short fleece, a bit fuzzy, and it spins up into a nice fluffy wool, which can be woven into a nice fluffy cloth. The other sort of fleece we had, the other sort of sheep we had, was this sort of thing. This is a longer staple. These sort of sheep, and sometimes the staples were even longer, each lock was, 6 or 8 inches long. And these sheep grazed on the richer grassland, the marshes and fens of the east of the country. And that sort of wool was spun up into a much shinier thread called worsted, where all the fibres are parallel. So it's a much shinier and smoother fabric. And I've got some examples here. I'm actually wearing a woolen cloth, and you can see it's been deliberately felted and then shorn to make it warmer and softer and thicker, and that's called fulling. And then this one here, I don't know whether you can see, it's a lot shinier, it's smoother. It's still made of wool, but that's worsted spun, where all the threads run parallel. And that's a finer cloth, was more expensive to make. But both of those types of sheep were common in medieval Britain. And you'd think that we'd spin all the yarn ourselves, but we didn't. In the early part of the Middle Ages, most of the wool that we produced was sent abroad. It went to the Low Countries or to Italy to be spun, because unlike us, they had a lot of people because they'd had a long period of peace and not much famine. But what they didn't have was much in the way of agricultural land, not even grazing land. So they had a lot of people who needed work, and not very much work for them to do in the way of growing food. So they imported raw materials like wool, and they exported finished cloth, and they were very, very good at it. In fact, in 1297, when there was a stoppage of the export of wool to Flanders, a chronicler called Hilbert noted that Flanders was practically empty because they could not get the wool from England. Later on in the Middle Ages, we started sorting our wool out ourselves. We started producing our own cloth, and some of that was exported as well. And a lot of it was exported through the port of Hull. Hull was the third biggest seaport that exported wool, and it exported roughly a quarter of the produce, of the wool that was produced in this country. And it made the citizens of Hull, some of them, very rich indeed. In 1327, a merchant from Hull called William de la Pole, was so rich that he was able to secure a loan for the king, Edward III, of £18,000. Now, that doesn't sound very much. That sounds like the sort of amount that you'd buy a decent first-hand car or a very nice second-hand car. You know, it's sort of one that had been a luxury car. You'd probably buy it for 18,000 if it was a few years old. No, 18,000 was a lot of money. It equates to about enough to pay the wages for 2,500 skilled men for a year. And that's if they didn't take any days off. If they had holidays like we do these days, it'd probably be for more like 2 years, 2.5, maybe 3 years. So it was an awful lot of money, and he got that money through wool. And he then went on, he became Baron of the Exchequer, and eventually he became an Earl, and then his family became Dukes. So it's as well to be, you know, well connected and lend money to the king. There was a slight thing that he was arrested at one point, so that the king didn't have to pay him back, but we'll draw a veil over that one. So I've talked a bit about the history of wool, and I now need to talk to you about why wool's special, what it's like to spin, and how we spin it. You see, wool's lovely because it's warm when wet, it's sustainable, it's recyclable, you can compost it, it's renewable, and best of all, the things that make it breed so that you get more. So we've got two types of wool, as I said. I'm going to look first at the shorter stage of wool. This here, and as I said, it's spun into something called woolen thread, which is where all the fibres go spirally around the yarn. So it's a fluffy yarn, it's warm, and it traps a lot of air. So I can't spin it like this. What I do is I've got my carders, and these are a flat paddle with a lot of little hooks of wire on them, and I lay my fleece across the carders like this. You don't need a lot, you don't want too much. People make a mistake and they put too much on, and then it gets all tricky. And then you start teasing it out. Until you can probably see I've put most of it from this one onto that one, but it's not ready yet. So we take it off and we start again, and we do this 2 or 3 times until the wool has been nicely carded. And what we get, now occasionally you get a little lump like this which isn't going to card properly, and that's called a noil. I'm going to drop that down. Normally I'd put it in a basket and we'd save it for stuffing something, but I'll put it on the grass and the birds can have it to use for their nests. So there, I've now got, instead of a handful of untidy bits of wool, I've got a nice fluffy web that I can put on the back of my carders. Now normally I'd be doing this sat down, so I'd do it on my lap. I'll tell you what, here. And then I can roll it up into what's called a rowlag. And then I can spin that. So you can see it's nice and tidy. Take my spindle. I should talk a bit about the spindle actually while I'm setting this up. I don't know whether you can see, this is made from a piece of broken pot. They were very, very resourceful and thrifty, the medieval people, so a lot of spindle rolls were made of broken pot. This one I happen to know was a mug. It was a rather nice mug that belonged to a friend of mine, and it got broken. And he let me have the broken bits, and I turned them into a spindle. So there you are, you see. I can spin it. So that's one way of preparing the threads. The other way is to take the longer stapled wool and comb it. Now, you're probably thinking, when I say comb, you're probably imagining something like this. But no, that's a hair comb. That's for combing people's hair, or possibly a horse's mane, not for combing wool. When you comb wool, you have something like this. This is a massive thing, and this is only 2/3 of it. Should actually come out to about here. This one's probably 18th century. It's very fragile. It's rather beautiful, and I've only got the one. I don't have a pair, and I found it. Someone had it in a puddle, so I took it home. I did pay him, not very much, and it weighs about 865 grams. So it probably weighed about 1 kilogram when it was new and fresh and whole. You'd mount it on a pole like that. You'd put wool onto the tines, and then you'd mount it on a pole at shoulder height. Then you'd take another one and you'd make an overarm motion and comb all the wool off the one on the pole and onto this one, and then you'd swap them over. And you do that 2 or 3 times until what you'd got resembled Santa's beard. You've got this huge waterfall of beautiful, finely combed, parallel threads. And every time you changed the combs over, you'd have little bits left over, a bit like those. And those are noils too. And you put them in a basket, and they'd go to be carded, like we've just done. So, let me just show you, because I've got it here. These are slightly later. These are probably 19th century, but these are a pair that are whole. If you imagine, you put one on a pole. These weigh 3 kilos each. And you do that all day. They must have had shoulders like hams of meat. It's a heavy job. It's a hard job. It's why I haven't combed any wool myself today. But take my word for it, if you comb wool, what you get is lovely parallel threads, like on here. All the threads lie parallel, and you can see there's hardly any fluff coming out of the edges. So when you spin that, what you get is lovely, lovely smooth thread, which is what we use to make the smoother cloth, the worsted cloth. So that's worsted spun, and the other is woolen spun. We've talked a bit about spinning, about the 2 different types of spinning. What we haven't talked about is why spinning works, how spinning works. How do we go from something fluffy off the back of a sheet that just pulls apart and blows away in the breeze? How do we go from that to something that we can actually use? Well, the answer is, pull it out like this. If instead of just pulling, I put some twist into it, look, I'm starting to produce thread. Now it's a bit fiddly to try and do it by hand, but listen. You see, it twangs. I've made thread, but it's quite long-winded to do it like this. And once I get quite a bit of it, if I let go of that end, if I move my hand up to twiddle further down, and it unravels again, and then I haven't got thread, I've got back to having fluff. So I need something to store it on. I know, I can put it on a stick. Yeah, I can put it on a stick when I've made it. That's a good idea. So I can pull some off and twiddle it. Or I could twiddle it with a stick, that's useful. And then, oh, I can store it on the stick. Oh, that's useful. Yeah, I could do that. Look. But then it's still quite hard on my hands. And I need to keep doing this. And the stick waves around. I've got an idea. If I put a weight on the stick, then my friends, the stick is more balanced. And actually, what I can do is I can still turn it like this, but actually I can turn it like this. And look, that's far more efficient. And I have somewhere to store the thread that I've made. So just tidy it up. And there, you see, so I can make pretty much as long a piece of thread as I want. Except, I've only got this bit in my hand, and so if I'm doing some gardening or walking to the market or something, I've spun all this, and I've got to go home to get some more, or I've got it in my pocket and it's got all fluffy and covered in bits of grass or just got matted. So we have another idea, another stick. Look, if I pre-prepare some fibre, I can put that on a bigger stick, and that stick can go in my belt, and then I've got enough fibre that I can go for quite a long time. I can take enough to work all day. So that means I'm portable, so that in between my other jobs, so whether it's cooking or watching the sheep or going to market or digging the garden or stopping the baby crawling into the fire, any of those, at any moment when my hands aren't busy doing something else, I can take my spindle and I can spin. So it makes it very, very portable, and it means that I can fill every moment of my day that's not doing something else, I can fill with spinning. Because frankly, it takes an awful long time to make enough thread to make anything out of thread. So you need to just keep at it. You need to be doing it all day, every day. And in the Middle Ages, people did. I say people, because women are people too. It was mostly women. Men did spin, but they only spun things to make rope or nets. They didn't spin for clothes. So spinning was women's work. So I have my spindle, and I have what's called this stick in my belt. It's called a distaff. And I can keep spinning. I'd have learnt to spin when I was tiny. I probably would have learnt when I could just about walk. I'd have just been teeny tiny, 2, 3, something like that, because they used to say the devil makes work for idle hands. And also, in order to get enough thread to clothe a family, you need as many hands at it as possible. Because if you think about it, if you want to make, let's say, the dress I'm wearing, you need to spin enough to go from my shoulder to the floor. We'll see how long that takes. Now it's important you don't let the spindle stop, because if it stops, it'll run backwards and unwind all the thread. I'm nearly there, aren't I? I'm nearly there. Oh, good. Look, that's enough to go from my shoulder to the floor. So, I just need to make enough threads to go completely across me from shoulder to shoulder. And then I need them to go this way, because weaving is 2 lots of threads. It's some that go up and down and some that go side to side. And then I need enough for my back. don't forget the back and the sleeves. And then there's a small matter of, I need another dress. I need at least one change of clothes, because if it rains and I get completely sodden, I need to have something else to put on. I could probably do with, you know, a better one to wear on high days and holidays. Or a worse one to wear, you know, for mucking the chickens out or something. And then of course, there's the whole thing about laundry. You don't want to wash a woolen dress all the time. It's a lot of work and it tends to go out of shape when you wash it. So I need to wear a linen shift underneath it, and I need to launder them. And so I'd probably have maybe 2, maybe 3 of those, one on, one off, and one in the wash. So when you think about the amount of time it takes to make those clothes, and then there's the rest of the family. There's husband, however many children there are. There might be some servants. I might want to make some cloth to sell. So it takes an awful long time to make. One of the things that means is that clothes in the medieval times were very, very valuable. I mean, they weren't hugely valuable. They weren't going to make a fortune, but they cost a lot of money. They took a lot of effort to make. So people valued them. People these days have a lot of clothes. They may have clothes that they've only worn twice, only ever going to wear twice. They may have clothes that they've never worn at all, got no intention of wearing it, still got the label on. They'll go to a charity shop in a bit. No. In the Middle Ages, people really valued them because they knew exactly how long it took to make. So sometimes they even left them in their wills. You'll find a will or an inventory that says that my second best dress to my daughter, something like that, because clothes just took a long time to make and were therefore valued. Just going to give you a quick demonstration of a close-up of spinning. I'm using my spindle made of a replica piece of broken medieval pottery. And so I set the spindle going, and I never want the spin to go up, the twist of the yarn, to go up into the unspun threads. So I use my fingers and thumbs of either hand, depending on what I'm doing, to just stop it doing that. And then when I reach the floor, I'll wind on. And what I do is I wind it round my thumb and my forefinger so that it stops. You see how it kinks up when I let the tension off? So if I do that, it stops it tangling as I do it. I undo the knot just by unwinding it. I wind the thread on to the spindle. And then I wind it up the shaft of the spindle. And then I just do a little backwards hitch so that it ties on. And then we're good to go again. So that's how spinning is done. I hope you've enjoyed this talk about medieval wool, textiles, spinning, and how the wool trade affected the prosperity of Hull as a port. There's a lot more information to be found online and at the museum's website, so why not have a browse? Thank you for watching. I'm Alison Milton.